My name is Helen Ward, and the moment my younger sister-in-law froze mid-sip at our family dinner, her fork trembling, her eyes fixed on the mark on my wrist, was the moment I knew the years of whispered insults were finally coming to an end. For a long second, everything in that dining room went still. Even the soft hum of the old refrigerator in the background felt louder than the people seated around me. Her husband's hand was still clamped around her arm, his knuckles white, his face drained of color, as he whispered, "Stop. That's the Skyfall sigil." He couldn't finish the rest. He didn't need to. Not after the way she'd mocked me again, publicly, asking why I worked in some storage archive, as if that was all I'd ever been. Not after years of letting her belittle me in front of relatives, neighbors, and anyone who would listen. But before that moment, before her face shifted from smug certainty to blunt fear, there was a whole chain of events that led us here, and it started with something as ordinary as a simple family dinner in our quiet corner of Indiana. My husband, Mark, and I had driven over to his brother's place for what was supposed to be a casual Sunday gathering. It was early fall, the kind where the air feels crisp, but the leaves haven't fully turned yet. The kind of weekend older Americans remember fondly. Football murmuring in the background, corn casserole on the counter, a dog begging under the table. I always came to these dinners hoping things would be peaceful. I'm not one for dramatics, and at 61, I've learned to let some things pass. Life's too short to fight every battle, especially with younger folks who think they've got the world all figured out. But my younger sister-in-law, Lindsay, never eased up. She was 34, all confidence and lip gloss, strutting around like she was the queen of small-town Indiana. She had a way of flicking her hair that said she wanted to be noticed, admired. And she wanted it, especially from me, wanted to prove she was superior somehow. Younger, louder, wealthier, or so she claimed. I set down the bowl of pot roast I'd brought, taking a seat at the long oak table. Mark had already disappeared into a conversation with his brother, the kind only middle-aged men could have half football, half home repair woes. Meanwhile, Lindsay circled over to me, wine glass already in hand. "So Helen," she said, drawing out my name, like it was something inconvenient she had to carry. "Still working at that storage place?" The table went quieter, not silent quiet enough for her voice to hang in the air. I smiled politely. The records facility keeps me busy. Plenty to organize. "Organize," she repeated, as if tasting the word and deciding it was beneath her. "Right. Nothing too complicated, I'm sure. I've always wondered what it must be like to have such a simple job." Her husband Daniel shot her a look, but she didn't see it or she ignored it. That was her way. I kept my tone even. "It suits me just fine." She gave a short laugh, the kind that isn't actually laughter at all. "Well, we can't all have exciting careers, right?" Mark stirred across the room, starting to get up, but I shook my head slightly. I didn't need him stepping in. I'd handled worse comments from Lindsay over the years, snide remarks about my clothes, my quietness, even the modest home Mark and I lived in. I took a breath and said gently, "Your husband works for the CIA, doesn't he?" That made her blink. That wasn't the direction she expected me to go. "Yes," she said, sitting up straighter. "He does. And he hunts dangerous people." I said it plainly, not as a challenge, not as a brag, just truth. Daniel looked up sharply from across the table. That's when it happened. He saw the edge of the sigil peeking from under my sleeve, just a simple mark about an inch wide, not flashy or dramatic, something easily dismissed by anyone who didn't know what it was. But Daniel knew. his face drained, hard. He grabbed Lindsay's wrist, mid-gesture, her wine glass halfway to her mouth. "Stop," he said, his voice barely more than air. "Don't say another word." Her confusion was immediate. "What? Why?" "That's the Skyfall sigil," he whispered. "Do you know what that means?" She frowned, looking from him to me. "What? Some tattoo?" But Daniel knew better, and suddenly the whole room did too. Lindsay froze, literally mid-sip, her confidence collapsing, as she stared at him for answers he couldn't give in front of everyone. That was the climax, but now comes the story behind it. Years ago, before Mark retired from field operations and accepted a quieter life with me, we both worked support roles for a sector of the intelligence community most Americans will never hear about. Skyfall wasn't glamorous. It wasn't cinematic. No spy suits, no car chases. It was information safeguarding, dead drop management, critical liaison work, late nights behind secured doors, hard decisions quietly made. But Lindsay didn't know any of that. She just assumed quiet meant unimportant. And to be fair, I never corrected her. Not because I was humble, though I tried to be, but because talking about the past wasn't something Mark or I were allowed to do freely. And frankly, at my age, I'd rather make a good casserole than explain who I am to someone who won't listen. So when Daniel reacted the way he did, Lindsay's mouth still suspended mid-sip, the truth finally broke through the thick shell of her arrogance. Her eyes darted back to me, really seeing me for the first time. And though I didn't say a word, the silence between us spoke louder than anything she had ever thrown my way. It wasn't revenge, not yet, but it was the start. I didn't sleep much the night after that dinner. Moments like that have a way of replaying themselves, looping through your mind, as if your memory refuses to let go. I kept seeing Lindsay's face, mid-sip, frozen, shocked, and Daniel's pale expression as he squeezed her arm. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. Not exactly. It was something heavier, something rooted deeper in the years that came before. People think the quiet ones don't feel much. They assume silence means weakness. But silence, at least in my life, was something earned and learned. The truth was, long before I'd ever married Mark, I was already good at keeping certain parts of my life tucked neatly away. I grew up in Muncie, Indiana, the daughter of a mechanic and a third-grade teacher. We didn't have much, but we had structure, and in households like ours, structure mattered. Dad believed in doing things with your hands. Mom believed in speaking softly, but with intent. I ended up being a strange mix of both, capable, steady, and quiet enough that people didn't notice me unless they needed something organized or fixed. That quietness followed me into adulthood. When I started working in the Federal Records Office in Indianapolis in my early 30s, I thought it would be a simple job. Filing, sorting, maintaining case logs, nothing flashy. Most people there treated it like any other government job. Clock in, clock out, bring brownies on birthdays. But one winter, everything changed. A senior intelligence officer visited our unit. I remember the day, clearly. Freezing rain tapping on the windows, the smell of burnt coffee lingering in the air. The officer was unimpressed with most of the staff, but stopped short when he reached my desk. There were 2 thick case files stacked in front of me, files 2 other clerks couldn't reconcile. I had finished both. "How did you match them so fast?" he asked. I shrugged. They were connected. Same date pattern, same travel codes. He studied me with an expression I didn't understand then. "Have you ever considered applying for internal clearance?" That was the start of it. People imagine the intelligence world like it is in movies. Guns, missions, disguises. But most of the real work happens behind locked steel doors, in rooms where fluorescent lights hum, and the carpets haven't been changed since the Reagan administration. It's paperwork, pattern recognition, long nights, and impossible decisions made quietly, often thanklessly. When I met Mark, I didn't know he was in field operations. He introduced himself as a logistics coordinator, and technically, that wasn't a lie. We were paired on an internal task one summer, and before I fully understood what was happening, we were having lunch together, on breaks, and swapping stories about our childhoods. He was careful, even then. I liked that about him. It wasn't until after our third date that he said, "There are parts of my work I can't talk about." I told him, "There are parts of mine I don't want to talk about." We laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that covered something deeper. When he eventually proposed, my father said he seems steady. My mother said he listens well. Both traits mattered more than they knew. Life with Mark was peaceful in its own unusual way. We bought a modest home in Noblesville, raised 2 dogs, and developed the kind of routines most married couples dream of. But intertwined with that peace was the understanding that both of us carried responsibility, silent responsibility for things other people never knew existed. I never told Lindsay any of this. Why would I? She entered the family years later, and from the moment we met, she treated me like someone who had never accomplished much. She always talked at me, never to me. She flaunted her job, her clothes, her vacations. I let it pass, quietly. But I noticed everything. Like the year she insisted on hosting Thanksgiving, because in her words, some people shouldn't be in charge of large meals. Or the time she corrected me, incorrectly, I should add about something I'd said regarding property tax deductions. Or the subtle way she made fun of the coat I wore one Christmas, calling it cute in an old-fashioned way. I wasn't hurt so much as I was puzzled. She was young, insecure, always reaching for something that could make her feel bigger. But I also knew something she didn't. Insecurity often reveals itself long before arrogance does. Her husband Daniel was different. Soft-spoken, observant, and respectful. He worked for the CIA, yes, but in a very different capacity than Mark had. He managed data, not field threats, but he knew enough to recognize a Skyfall sigil, one of the few symbols no one mentioned outside secured halls. That's what made his reaction so overwhelming for Lindsay. She had spent years trying to stand taller by stepping on me, and then, with one accidental glimpse of a Mark she didn't understand, the pedestal she'd built for herself crumbled. That night, after the dinner, when Mark and I got home, he set his coat down, gently, then looked at me with a half smile. "You handled that well," he said. "I didn't do anything." "That's what I mean." We sat together in the kitchen, the soft glow of the stovetop light stretching across the counter. Outside, the late autumn wind rustled through the dry leaves. It was peaceful, familiar, and yet the air felt charged with something else, something that had been building for years. I sipped my chamomile tea and stared at the steam rising from the mug. "I wonder what she'll do now," I said. Mark shrugged. "People reveal themselves when they're embarrassed. Let's see which version of Lindsay we get next." I knew exactly what he meant. Part of me hoped she'd retreat quietly, finally realizing that not everyone fits neatly into the boxes she creates. But another part of me knew Lindsay, and people like her rarely apologize first. No, what happened at that dinner wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The days after that dinner were strangely quiet, too quiet almost. Not a call, not a text, Not even one of those little passive-aggressive messages Lindsay liked to send through the family group chat. Nothing. It was like she'd taken a step back from the world to regroup, which I suppose was better than watching her escalate again. But silence from Lindsay wasn't peace. It was pressure, building somewhere I couldn't see. Mark noticed it too. "Enjoy it while it lasts," he said one morning while making coffee. "She's not done." I wanted to disagree, to believe that maybe the shock at dinner had softened her edges, but deep down, I knew better. People who live on pride don't surrender that easily. They rebuild. They strike when they feel small. It wasn't long before the tension resurfaced. The first sign came at church the following Sunday. It was one of those crisp Indiana mornings where everyone showed up in sweaters and carried baked goods wrapped in foil. Mark and I were helping set up tables in the fellowship hall when I heard my name. "Helen." I turned to see Ellen Moore, one of the women who always stood near the coffee urn, approach me with that smile people wear when they think they know something important. "I heard about the incident at dinner last week," she said, tapping my arm lightly. I blinked. "What incident?" "Oh, just a little mix-up," she replied. "Lindsay said you got upset when she asked about your job. Poor thing said she didn't mean to embarrass you." I felt a slow pulse at the base of my neck. So that's how Lindsay was going to play it. Rewrite the story before anyone else could. "That's not exactly how it happened," I said calmly. Ellen leaned in. "You know Lindsay. She can be spirited, but you shouldn't take it personally." I smiled to keep from sighing. I don't. But inside, something settled, something firm. Lindsay wasn't retreating. She was rebuilding her version of events. By the time we left church, 3 different people had mentioned it in one way or another. Each version slightly altered, as if Lindsay were adjusting her narrative depending on who listened. Mark noticed my quiet mood on the drive home. "She's trying to save face," he said. "Embarrassment makes people rewrite history." "I don't care if she talks about me," I replied. "But dragging me into lies, that's different." He nodded. "Just stay steady. That's your strength." The next problem came a week later. Mark and I were sorting through old boxes in the garage things from when his mother passed. I always tried to handle her belongings gently. She had been a good woman, warm and thoughtful, the kind who remembered every birthday and baked pies without needing a recipe. Inside one of the boxes was a small jewelry case. Nothing expensive, just sentimental items, a locket, a brooch, a bracelet she wore every Thanksgiving. "These were supposed to go to Emily," I said, softly, referring to Mark's daughter from his first marriage. Mark nodded. Mom wanted her to have them. We set the items aside to give to Emily the next time she visited. But when I opened the case again a few days later, the locket was missing. At first, I thought I'd misplaced it. I went through the boxes twice, checking the lining, even searching the floor. Nothing. That's when Mark spoke quietly from behind me. "Lindsay was here last night while you were outside with the dogs." I froze. "Why?" "She said she wanted to borrow a bundt pan." I stared at the empty velvet slot where the locket should have been. "She doesn't even bake." "No," Mark said, his jaw tightening. "She doesn't." I didn't accuse her. I didn't raise my voice. But a line had been crossed, and I felt it settle deep inside. This was no longer about snide remarks or social jabs. This was interference. This was disrespect toward someone who had passed a line most Americans, especially older ones, still take seriously. I placed the jewelry case back in the box and closed the lid. "Let it be," I said finally. But what I meant was I'll handle this differently. Things escalated further at a family birthday gathering 2 weeks later. It was for Mark's father, who was turning 83. The house was crowded with relatives, cousins, in-laws, grandchildren running in circles. There was ham baking in the oven and an old Frank Sinatra record playing in the background. It should have been a peaceful afternoon. But Lindsay found a way to slip into my side of the room, holding a plate of lemon bars like she owned the place. So she said, smiling too brightly, "Are you still mad about dinner?" I wasn't mad, I replied, just surprised. She laughed. "Well, Daniel tends to overreact. You know how men get when they think something serious is happening." "That wasn't an overreaction," I said carefully. Her smile tightened. "Oh, please." A little tattoo, I Googled it. Nothing came up. It's probably just something old you got when you were younger. My heart slowed. So that's where she was going. "You can't find it online because it isn't meant to be found," I said quietly. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. "Well," she replied, tilting her head, "maybe if you were more open, people wouldn't make assumptions about you." Mark approached, then placing a hand on my back. "Everything okay?" "Just girl talk," Lindsay chirped. I looked at her, letting silence speak the words she didn't want to hear. Because for the first time since I'd known her, I saw something shift behind her eyes. Not arrogance, not mockery. Fear, real fear. She knew then that she was pushing into something she didn't understand. And like all people who are insecure, fear made her reckless. Later that night, after the guests left, and the house grew quiet again, I stood alone at the kitchen sink, washing the last of the dishes. The window looked out onto the backyard, where the motion light clicked on as a stray cat wandered across the lawn. Mark joined me drying a plate while I rinsed another. "She's getting bold," he said. "I know. What are you going to do?" I looked at the water swirling down the drain. "Sometimes," I said softly, "the quiet ones let others dig their own holes." Mark nodded slowly. "Just make sure she doesn't drag you into the hole with her." I smiled faintly. "Oh, I won't. Because there is a point, everyone has it, where belittling becomes betrayal." And Lindsay had finally crossed it. I didn't expect Daniel to show up at my house the following Thursday morning, but there he was, standing on my front porch, with his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his coat, his expression tight, with something he was trying hard to hide. Mark had already left for his part-time maintenance shift at the community center, so it was just me and the chilly November air as I opened the door. "Daniel," I said, surprised. "Everything all right?" He nodded quickly, though his eyes told another story. "Can we talk?" I motioned him inside. He stepped over the threshold like a man approaching sacred ground, pausing in the entryway, as if unsure he had permission to continue. I gestured toward the kitchen, and he followed, taking a seat at the small round table Mark and I had used for over 20 years. I poured him coffee, black, no sugar. He used to take cream, but field-adjacent work has a way of simplifying your habits. Once seated, he exhaled a long breath. "Lindsay's been different," he began quietly. "Ever since that dinner. She hasn't said what happened, but she's shaken. And I need to understand what I saw." I rested my hands around my mug. "What do you think you saw?" His eyes flicked to my wrist. "That sigil," he whispered. "Skyfall. I haven't heard that name since my orientation. They said it was discontinued years ago, absorbed into another branch. But I recognized it the second you shifted your sleeve." I nodded slowly, choosing my words. Most things don't end the way they say they do. Sometimes programs go quiet. Sometimes they just change their doors and keep their halls. He swallowed, trying to piece it together. Were you actually part of it?" Silence filled the room. I let it hang there a moment, then leaned back in my chair. I was never a field agent, I said, but I handled sensitive coordination work. Places people files most folks will never know existed. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't dangerous in the cinematic sense, but it mattered. Daniel rubbed his forehead. So the sigil, it was given to staff who completed a certain level of clearance and reliability. It meant you were trusted with things you couldn't repeat, couldn't write down, couldn't even hint at. It wasn't a badge. It was a responsibility. He nodded, absorbing it. And Lindsay mocked you without knowing any of this. She didn't need to know, I said softly. And frankly, it wasn't hers to know. He looked ashamed, then deeply. So, she's been telling people you overreacted, that you bragged, but that's not what happened. I smiled faintly. People rewrite stories when reality doesn't flatter them. He lowered his eyes. She also said you tried to intimidate her. That made me laugh. Not loudly, just a soft breath of disbelief. Intimidate her. Daniel, I've done nothing but stay quiet. That's the problem, he said with a sigh. She doesn't understand silence. She fills it with whatever suits her. He wasn't wrong. After Daniel left, I went about my day laundry, sweeping the porch, walking Rosie and Booth, our two aging beagles, who still believed they owned the neighborhood. But under those ordinary tasks, thoughts churned. The truth about the sigil, the truth about my past, it wasn't something I wanted to expose. I didn't want people looking at me differently. I was content being the quiet one. But Lindsay's behavior was reaching a place where misunderstandings could turn into real damage. I couldn't let that happen. That evening, when Mark came home, I told him Daniel had visited. He nodded thoughtfully. He's a decent man. Lost, but decent. Do you think Lindsay will stop? I asked. He shook his head. People like her only stop when they hit something harder than their pride. What do you think that is? He took my hand gently. The truth. 3 days later, I found an envelope in my mailbox without a stamp. Inside was a printed page. No handwriting, no signature. Just a message. If you're trying to make me look bad, it won't work. You've always been jealous, Lee. I exhaled slowly. Jealous of her. A woman 27 years younger, who mocked my clothes and belittled my life. The idea was almost funny, if not for how deeply it revealed her insecurity. But it was the last line that mattered. It won't work. I wasn't trying to make her look bad. I wasn't doing anything at all. But she was spiraling, grasping for control in a situation she didn't understand. I placed the note in a drawer. Mark found me, standing there quiet. She's escalating, he said. I know. What are you going to do? Nothing, I replied. Not yet. Because sometimes doing nothing lets the truth surface on its own. That opportunity came sooner than I expected. We were invited to a small dinner at Mark's brother's house. Just immediate family, nothing fancy. I wore a simple cardigan, jeans, and a pair of comfortable flats. Lindsay arrived, late dressed in a shimmer-covered blouse that was a little too glamorous for meatloaf night. She made a point of sitting across from me. Halfway through the meal, she cleared her throat loudly. I think we should talk about what happened a few weeks ago, she said, staring directly at me. Her husband stiffened. Mark lowered his fork. I set down my napkin, if you'd like. It's just confusing, Lindsay continued. 1 minute we're having dinner, the next minute, Daniel starts acting like he's seen a ghost. All because of a tattoo. I mean, really. Daniel leaned forward. Lindsay. No, she snapped. I'm tired of walking on eggshells. If Helen thinks she's part of some top-secret agency, let her say it. Her voice carried across the table, brittle and loud. I stayed still, very still. Lindsay, I said quietly, I never claimed anything. You made assumptions because the truth didn't fit your view of me." Her face reddened. "What truth?" Before I could answer, Daniel spoke firmly, clearly. "The kind of truth you don't get to mock." She blinked, thrown off. "What are you talking about?" she asked. Daniel turned to me. "May I?" I nodded. He took a steady breath. "That mark on her wrist, it's real, and it's serious. And if you knew anything about what it meant, you'd be embarrassed for what you said." The room fell silent. Lindsay's hand tightened around her water glass. "I don't believe you," she murmured. "You don't have to," Daniel replied, "but you will respect her." I looked at Lindsay, then really looked at her. Her fear wasn't anger. It wasn't even shock. It was a woman realizing she had no idea who she'd been picking a fight with. Not because I was dangerous. But because she finally understood I'd been choosing kindness over pride for years. And she had mistaken it for weakness. After that dinner, after Daniel finally spoke the truth out loud, something in the family shifted. Not all at once, not dramatically like a slammed door, but slowly, subtly, like a house settling on its foundation after years of quiet tension. You could feel the shift in the way people looked at me, or maybe in the way they looked at Lindsay. Either way, something fragile had cracked. 2 days later, Mark and I were at Kroger buying groceries when we ran into his cousin Melanie. She approached us near the deli counter with the same expression she used when gossip was too heavy to hold. "I heard there was a situation," she said, glancing around as though the packaged turkey might overhear. I smiled politely. Families have those sometimes. "Yes, well," she lowered her voice. "Lindsay said you embarrassed her." Mark straightened beside me. "What did she say exactly?" "That you pretended to be part of some secret agency and tried to intimidate her." Melanie shrugged. But Daniel told my husband another story. A very different story. The contrast in narratives was spreading. I simply said, "People hear what they want to hear." She nodded slowly, studying me the way people do when they realize the version of you they believed wasn't the whole truth. "Well, I don't think Lindsay is handling it well." I could have told her that much myself. Later that week, Emily, Mark's daughter, came by with her fiancé to drop off a set of mixing bowls she'd borrowed. She sat at my kitchen table, her eyes warm and curious. "Dad told me a little about what happened," she said, as she wrapped both hands around a mug of tea. "Lindsay's been calling everyone." I lifted an eyebrow. "Everyone?" "Pretty much," Emily sighed. "She's saying you embarrassed her, that you're trying to make her look small. But then, Daniel called my fiancé and told him there's more to the story." "Daniel's trying," I said softly. "But Lindsay, she's used to controlling the narrative." Emily leaned forward. "Honestly, people are getting tired of her attitude. This just made them notice it more." Her words were gentle, but they carried a weight that surprised me. It's strange how years of small cruelties can go unseen until suddenly everyone sees it once. Before she left, Emily opened her bag. "Oh, Dad said you found Grandma's jewelry." "Yes," I said, pulling out the small case. "We set them aside for you." She opened it, her smile warm, but then it faded. "Where's the locket?" she asked. I paused. It wasn't there when I checked again. She blinked. But it was her favorite piece. "I know." Her voice softened. "Do you think Lindsay—" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Emily exhaled slowly. "I'll handle it," she said. "No," I replied gently. "This isn't yours to carry." But she shook her head. "She's crossed too many lines." And just like that, the divide widened. The next sign came unsolicited. I received a text from Mark's older sister Claire, someone who rarely reached out, but always kept track of the family currents. Claire Daniel stopped by our house. He told us what the sigil meant. Why didn't you ever say something? I typed back slowly because it wasn't meant to be said. A moment later, well, Lindsay is telling people the opposite. Just so you know, we don't believe her. Support was coming, but not loudly, not dramatically. Quietly, respectfully. The way older Americans often handle conflict. Not with flashy accusations, but with stillness that speaks louder. But support didn't stop Lindsay. If anything, it made her worse. The breaking point happened at Mark's father's house the following Sunday. He'd asked all of us to come over, said he wanted a simple lunch with family. When an 83-year-old requests something like that, you don't argue. We arrived to find the living room full aunts, cousins, grandchildren, sprawled out with coloring books. The smell of pot roast simmered from the kitchen. And then Lindsay walked in. All eyes shifted as she made her entrance in a blazer, far too formal for a family lunch. Her chin high, her smile tight. She sat directly across from me, even though there were open chairs everywhere else. A statement without words. Midway through the meal, Mark's father said, "Helen, would you pass the rolls?" Before I could reach for them, Lindsay spoke. "Actually," she said loudly, "I think we should clear the air about something." Her tone had that brittle confidence, the kind that comes from insecurity, dressed up as authority. Mark stiffened but didn't speak. "I think," she continued, "that pretending to be something you're not is harmful to a family. Don't you all agree?" A heavy silence fell over the table. I looked at her calmly. "Who's pretending?" "You are." She pointed at my wrist, like a child accusing someone of cheating in a board game, with your little mark and your cryptic comments and the way you let people misunderstand. I remained still. Then Daniel set down his fork with a sharp clink. "That's enough," he said, his voice low. "No," she snapped. "I'm tired of feeling judged when she's the one acting." Daniel cut her off louder this time. "Lindsay, stop." Everyone stared. He turned toward the table, his voice steady. "Helen isn't pretending. That mark is real. The clearance associated with it is real. And the reason you can't find anything about it on the internet is because it was never meant to be public. You don't get to belittle her for something you don't understand." Lindsay froze again, her mouth halfway open, her expression breaking under the weight of something too heavy to hold up. And Daniel added quietly, "You don't get to steal from her either." Gasps around the room. Lindsay's whole face drained. Emily looked at her and said, "Grandma's locket. You took it." I didn't." "No," Daniel said firmly. "You did." The room fell into a silence, so deep you could hear the old clock ticking in the hallway. For once, Lindsay had nothing. No comeback, no sneer, no defense. She sat there small and shaken, the entire family seeing her clearly for the first time. And for the first time, I didn't feel angry. I felt relieved. Because truth has a strange way of dividing people, not cruelly, not violently, but cleanly. Those who live in it stand on one side. Those who hide from it stand on the other. And Lindsay finally had run out of places to hide. Nobody spoke for several long seconds after Daniel's words settled into the room. It was the kind of silence you feel in your bones, thick, unmoving, almost sacred. Even the grandkids, who had been running through the hall earlier, seemed to sense something had shifted. Lindsay sat there pale small, her hands gripping her napkin so tightly it tore between her fingers. Mark's father was the first to break the silence. At 83, he didn't need volume to command attention. His voice carried authority simply because he'd lived long enough to earn it. "Lindsay," he said slowly. Is this true? Her lip trembled. I just borrowed it. I was going to put it back. Emily shook her head, her voice soft but steady. You had 2 weeks. Lindsay's eyes darted around the table, searching for someone, anyone to defend her. But the faces that had once smiled politely, even sympathetically, when she told her embellished stories, now stared back with a clarity she had never experienced. The curtain had dropped. There was no role left to play. Daniel swallowed hard. We'll return the locket after lunch, he said, almost to himself, and I'll make sure it stays where it belongs. Lindsay turned toward him sharply. You're taking her side. I'm taking the truth side, he answered, and there was something final in the way he said it. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a quiet ache, an ache for the years she could have chosen kindness, but didn't. And for the years, I fed myself the lie that staying silent was always the gentler choice. Mark reached under the table and lightly touched my hand, a small reminder that I wasn't alone in this. I glanced at him, grateful, then looked back at Lindsay. She wasn't angry now. She was scared, not of me, not of the sigil, but of losing something she valued more than respect her image. When Mark's father cleared his throat again, everyone turned to him. I think we should eat, he said simply. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't resolution. It was his way of saying the conversation was over for now. After lunch, people gathered their coats, murmuring soft goodbyes and avoiding Lindsay's eyes. She kept close to Daniel, her hand slipping into the crook of his arm, like a child needing reassurance. As they reached the door, Daniel paused. Can I talk to you for a moment? He asked me. I nodded, stepping into the front hallway with him. He exhaled, leaning one hand against the wall. I'm sorry, he said, for all of this, for her behavior, for not stepping in sooner. It wasn't your responsibility, I replied gently. We all choose our own actions. He looked down. But I'm her husband. I should have known she was spiraling. I hesitated. You can't fix someone who refuses to look at herself honestly. He nodded, his jaw tightening. I'll make this right. Lindsay waited near the doorway, her eyes red, her shoulders tense. When she met my gaze, she didn't say anything. I didn't expect her to. Some apologies are too big for words. That evening, the house felt unusually still. Mark brewed a pot of coffee, though neither of us truly needed the caffeine, and we sat at the kitchen table with only the warm hum of the dishwasher behind us. He broke the silence first. I saw your face today, he said. You didn't enjoy any of it. I wasn't supposed to. He nodded. That's what makes you different from her. I traced the rim of my mug absent-mindedly. I just don't understand why she needed to tear me down all these years. Mark took a long breath. Some people are built on comparison. They can only measure their worth by looking down at someone else. I looked at him. You think she'll change? He thought for a moment. People don't change overnight, but sometimes, when the truth hits hard enough, they wake up. I leaned back in my chair, exhaustion settling across my shoulders. Today felt like a turning point. It was. The next morning, I found the locket sitting on our porch in a small velvet pouch, cleaned, polished, and placed carefully, as if someone wanted to return not just the item, but the respect they had taken. There was no note, no text message, no knock on the door. But I didn't need any of that. The act itself was loud enough. I brought the locket inside and placed it gently on the counter. For a moment, I just stood there, letting the familiarity of it warm something inside me. I remembered Mark's mother wearing it every Thanksgiving, her fingers brushing it absent-mindedly when she laughed. I closed the pouch and set it aside for Emily. When Mark came into the kitchen, he saw it and nodded. She returned it. "Yes," I said quietly. "She did." He leaned against the counter. That might be the closest thing to an apology we get. Maybe. I paused. Or maybe it's the start of one. 2 days later, the real consequence came quiet, as most real consequences do. Mark and I were leaving the community center after his shift when we saw Lindsay's car pull into the parking lot. She got out slowly, her posture unsure. Daniel stepped out after her, but he stayed back, letting her walk toward us alone. Her voice was fragile when she spoke. "Helen, can we talk?" I glanced at Mark, then nodded. She swallowed hard. I'm sorry for the locket. And for everything else. I shouldn't have treated you the way I did." Her eyes glistened, not dramatically, just honestly. I didn't know she whispered. I didn't understand any of it. "That's all right," I said softly. "Understanding isn't owed. Respect is." She nodded, her voice cracking. I'm trying." Trying. It wasn't much, but it was more than I had ever expected. I placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll start there." She let out a shaky breath, and Daniel stepped forward, placing a hand on her back. Together they walked toward the car, quieter, smaller, but perhaps a bit more real. Mark and I watched them go. "That was a big step for her," he said. "Yes," I answered. "But the bigger step was you telling the truth when it mattered." He gave me a small smile. Sometimes the quiet ones need a voice behind them. I took his hand, and sometimes the loud ones need a moment of silence to finally hear themselves. As we walked to our car, a strange comfort settled over me. Revenge had never been my goal. Truth had done the work for me. A week passed after Lindsay approached me outside the community center. It wasn't dramatic the way things changed. It didn't happen with sudden apologies or grand gestures. It happened the way most real change does in people past 30, past 40, past 50. Slowly, awkwardly, like someone learning to walk on a surface that no longer feels familiar. I noticed it first during a Sunday potluck at the local church. Lindsay arrived, wearing jeans instead of the glitter-covered blouses she usually favored. She didn't make an entrance. She didn't command attention. She didn't circle around the room, fishing for admiration. She simply placed her dish green bean casserole a little overbaked on the table and quietly asked if she could help refill the coffee. I didn't say anything, and neither did she. But I saw Danielle Moore, who normally flocked to Lindsay for gossip, glance at her curiously when Lindsay ignored the usual group hovering near the dessert table. Ignoring them was something unheard of before. Later that afternoon, Lindsay came to stand beside me near the punch bowl. She didn't make eye contact, just folded her hands and said softly, "I'm working on myself." It wasn't long, it wasn't poetic, but it was honest. And that mattered more than anything else. A few days later, Emily came over to pick up the locket. She held it in her hands, the way young women hold something fragile from a woman they loved. "She brought it back," she asked. "Yes," I said. Emily nodded slowly. "That means something." "It does." She slipped the chain through her fingers. "I never thought she'd do that." Neither did I. Emily sat down at the kitchen table, her eyes thoughtful. "I think people forget that kindness is a choice, a hard one sometimes." I smiled. Most don't realize how heavy quiet kindness can be. She looked at me with something gentle in her expression, something that felt like gratitude and respect mixed together. "You know, I learned a lot watching how you handled all this." I shook my head. "I didn't do anything." That's the point, she replied. You didn't fight her. You didn't try to destroy her. You just let the truth do the work. Her words stayed with me long after she left. Sometimes the best revenge isn't punishment. Sometimes it's letting someone finally see themselves clearly. Near the end of November, Lindsay asked if she could stop by. Daniel came with her, though he stayed mostly silent, letting her navigate the moment herself. They brought a small container of homemade soup potato leek, and Lindsay set it on the counter like an offering. I wanted to thank you, she said quietly, for not making everything worse. Lindsay, I never wanted things to be bad. She nodded, her voice trembling a little. I know. I see that now. Daniel put a supportive hand on her back. She's been talking to someone, he added. A counselor. It's helping. I felt something warm move through me. Not triumph, not superiority, just relief. Not because she was changing for me, but because she was finally changing for herself. You're welcome here, I said softly, as long as you're honest with me and with yourself. Lindsay nodded again, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked young. Not childish, just young, like someone starting over. Before she left, she turned back and said, I don't know how long it'll take, or how well I'll do, but I want to be better than who I was. That's all anyone can ask, I replied. And I meant it. As December arrived, the whole family began preparing for Christmas. The kind older Americans look forward to carols on the radio, simple wreaths on the porch, neighbors waving from behind frosted windows. Mark and I decorated our tree with the same old ornaments we'd used since our first Christmas together. Wooden stars, ceramic bells, and 2 lopsided angels made by Emily in 2nd grade. One evening, as we finished hanging the last strand of lights, Mark stepped back and smiled at me. You look lighter, he said. I feel lighter. He slipped an arm around me. You did the right thing. Did I asked quietly. He kissed the top of my head. Kindness is never the wrong thing. Difficult, yes. Uncomfortable always. But wrong, never. I leaned into him, listening to the soft hum of the heater as snow brushed against the windows. It had been a long season, one filled with fractures and misunderstandings, with pride and insecurity, with truth and consequence. But now, as the year drew to a close, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Peace. Not because everything was perfect, not because every wound was healed, but because I had chosen to stay the woman I wanted to be, not the woman someone else's cruelty tried to shape me into. On Christmas Eve, Lindsay approached me again, this time with a plate of gingerbread cookies shaped like little stars. I've been practicing, she said shyly. They're not very good. I bit into one. They're wonderful. Her eyes brightened, just slightly, but enough. And that was when it hit me. Revenge had never been the heart of this story. Not really. It wasn't about proving anything or winning anything. It was about something far simpler. A reminder that you never know who someone is beneath the surface. A reminder that the quietest people often carry the heaviest truths. A reminder that dignity, real dignity, doesn't roar. It whispers. And sometimes that whisper is powerful enough to change a family. To anyone listening to my story, I hope you carry this with you. Kindness does not make you weak. Silence does not make you small. And the truth, when spoken or simply revealed, has a way of doing justice all on its own. If this story touched you, if you saw a bit of your own family in mine, if you've ever been the quiet one or the misunderstood one, I invite you to share this audio with someone who needs the reminder. Sometimes all a person needs is a story that makes them feel seen.